Good morning, Com 374. This is David Weber, your communication consulting instructor. And we're doing this quick and dirty video lecture to make up for the fact that we did not meet in Zoom this morning. Zoom has been down, at least for me, it's been down all morning. My 9 o'clock class did not meet. I did a quick and dirty video lecture for them. And many of them were reporting to me they too were having problems with Zoom. I couldn't even log on. I kept on getting error messages. So we had to sort of drop back and punt, and the video lecture is that punt. So we're doing the same with this 10 o'clock class because I couldn't get into Zoom. A couple of you reported you couldn't either. Maybe the issues will be solved by Wednesday. But anyway, by the way, I use that term, quick and dirty. That's something I want you to get accustomed to hearing. It doesn't mean anything naughty, nothing bad. Quick means quick, very timely, done in a shorter amount of time rather than a longer amount of time. And dirty just simply means less than absolutely perfect. There's a saying that I like called perfect is the enemy of good enough. So dirty emphasizes, hey, this solution, this entity, this artifact, it's good enough for our purposes. And so it is with this lecture, I hope. So, quick and dirty lecture on the topics that I wanted to cover today in class. And we would have been covering them interactively in breakout rooms and so forth, but we're just not going to have those tools right now. So the first topic I want to cover is problem-oriented consulting versus solution-oriented consulting. We touched on this actually in COM 105 when we talked about a problem focus versus a solution focus. When we learned about the core skills, the department core skills. So let's put this into practice now with a consulting example. Let's say that you are a new manager. You've been a manager for 6 months, and you manage the work of 8 people in a large team. And so, you contact me. You've heard about me as a communication coach, and you say, yeah, I got this problem that I need to solve. I don't know how to solve it. Can you help me solve this problem? And I say, well, yeah, let's meet. We'll talk about it. So I go to your office. Let's assume COVID is behind us and I actually can show up in your office. And I say, well, tell me about the problem. And you say, well, the problem is there's a guy on my team, he's been in this organization for over 20 years. He thinks he knows it all. He thinks he's seen it all. And whenever I give instructions to my team to proceed a certain way, based on what my bosses have told me, he says, I'm going to do it my way. I've been here a long time, and I just can't seem to get him to do what I think he should do. So it's a real problem for me, and it could be a problem for him if this doesn't stop, because I may have to, somehow get rid of him. So I say, well, when did this problem start? And you go through a whole thing. Well, it started when I first came aboard, and our very first meeting, he sat there with his arms folded and looking down, and he grunted whenever I asked him a question. So it started right away as soon as I came aboard as the manager. I said, well, what have you tried already? Well, I've tried to sweet talk him. I've tried to bribe him with, if he does X, Y, and Z that I request, I'll give him A, B, C incentive. I've tried everything. Nothing works. And so I say, well, that's interesting information for me. How do you feel about this problem? Well, I feel terrible. I feel like I'm a terrible manager. I feel like I can't do anything I'm supposed to do. I feel worried that if I can't fix this problem, that I'm going to get fired. I say, very interesting information, useful information for me. What about where does it really hurt? Where are the pain points in this problem? And you say, well, the pain points, I guess the pain points are like at meetings, and he'll say he refuses to do something, and all the other 6 or 7 people hear that, and they start to think, well, maybe I don't have to do what this manager said. So I'm exploring all of the different elements and dimensions of the problem. Now let's compare that to a solution-focused approach. And, same thing, you say, hey, I got the problem. I've heard you can help me. I come to your office and I say, well, let me ask you this. What's the set of conditions that, if they could be different, you'd be very happy? What are the set of conditions that, all things being equal, you'd rather be different? And you say, well, I've got this problem with this guy and blah, blah, blah. And I say, well, that's useful information for me. What would be your desired alternative to all that? And you start describing what kind of conditions would ideally prevail if all of those conditions that you would rather be different were in fact different and to your liking. And I say, gosh, that's great. You've been a manager for 6 months. You wouldn't have been made a manager if you didn't have something on the ball already. And in 6 months, that's enough time to actually learn at least a few skills. What are the strengths that you have? Again, I grant you 6 months is not 6 years, but what are the skills you have right now that if you relied on them, they might help you bring about that change that you just described in fascinating detail? And you say, well, I'm an optimist. I think that things can be changed for the better, blah, 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 whatever. And I say, gosh, that's great stuff. We have about 20 more minutes. But, I want you to imagine that at the end of this conversation, you actually could take one step, even a small one, to start moving in the direction of bringing about that change you described a few minutes ago, using at least one or part of one of the strengths you just described to me a moment ago. And you say, well, I guess I could blah, blah, blah. Now, if you put yourself in the shoes of that client, I think you'll recognize that the focus on the problem starts to be all about the smallness of that client and the weakness of his or her choices, or the pitfalls that he or she fell into. It's all about failure, disappointment, frustration. The other approach, the solution-focused approach, is more about, geez, I got this going for me. I actually know what I want as an alternative to the current conditions that I'm, would rather be different. Oh my gosh, I could, at the end of this conversation, actually do this small step, and I'd be moving in the direction I want. I think you can detect that the latter is much more uplifting. I don't like that word empowering for a variety of reasons, but I'll use it for the moment. More empowering, more personally, more exciting. Clients often talk about feeling energized or excited when they do the latter when they have the latter conversation. And I don't really hear that very often when I used to do the first kind of conversation. Well, that's the difference between the problem-solving approach, the problem-oriented approach to problem-solving, and the solution-focused approach to problem-solving. All a problem is a set of conditions that, for whatever reason, you'd rather be different. And the thing is, if the problem-solving context, or if the problem context is, metals or bridges or airplanes or some sorts of inanimate objects that can be altered and changed for the better by identifying where the weakness is. If I want to improve the strength of a bridge, if I'm an engineer, and I'm analyzing the weaknesses in the bridge, I'm analyzing the weaknesses of these joints or whatever it is. Problem-solving approach is absolutely okay. If I'm a test pilot and I'm wanting to improve the flight characteristics of a new airframe. Looking at, what caused the wings to fall off? That's, how did that happen? How could we possibly have made that happen? That's absolutely okay. But humans are not metal. Humans are not rocks in a stone bridge. Human beings are fundamentally unpredictable. They are very malleable. They change from day to day. They have good days and bad days. Generally speaking, an airplane is not going to have a good day or a bad day. It's going to have a whole bunch of good days or a whole bunch of bad days, or suddenly one day it's going to have a bad day, and it's probably not going to be a good day until the bad day gets fixed. So human beings are not quite like that. And so the solution-focused approach to solving problems is really a solution-focused approach to searching for solutions, to selecting conditions that you would rather have be so, and selecting approaches to more likely rather than less likely bring those desired conditions about. And that is the approach that we favor in this course. So much so that we do not use the word problem in this course. I want you to start eliminating that word from your vocabulary in this course. I may use it occasionally, if only to talk about the difference between the two approaches to bringing about desired conditions. And I may use the word problem just as a quick shorthand for referencing conditions that you or a client would rather be different. But I try to avoid the latter as much as I possibly can. And in working with a client, I never use the word problem. If the client uses the word, I don't get on his or her case about it. I just let it go in one ear and out the other. And I remind myself that when he or she is talking about, quote, a problem, what he or she is really talking about is simply conditions that he or she, for whatever reasons, would rather be different. So that is the number one topic I wanted to hit on today. We don't talk about problems in this course. Now, this is very possibly, based on my experience of teaching this course, this is very possibly not a snap for you to buy into or adopt. It may be, but it may not be. Either way is perfectly okay for me. I think it's great if you hear what I'm saying and you go, oh man, I get it. Yeah, easy, no problem. But I also understand, I also get that, you may say, yeah, but gosh, I don't know. Looking at problems is actually kind of good because, if you find out what the problem is with, between you and that new, that old, that 20-year veteran of the organization, if you find out what the problem is with what you've done, you can correct those problems. I totally follow that argument. I think I have some good counter arguments for it. But what you'll have to do is simply contact me via email, via FaceTime. I love FaceTime just because it's easier than Skype. And email, of course, always works. I can give you some information about how to get in touch with me via FaceTime if you email me. But we can discuss this. I want you to not necessarily be persuaded to avoid as much as possible the use of the word problem forever in your life. You may, for example, after this course is over, you may take another course in consulting or organizational analysis or something, organizational development, in which the problem-solving approach really prevails. Solution-focused thinking, solution-focused approaches are increasingly more prominent or prevalent in organizational work. It's not 100% mainstream yet, but it's probably a good 85% mainstream, 75, 80%, somewhere through there, mainstream. In other words, it's much more common now than it was 10 years ago when I started teaching this course. But it's still not the primary approach. The primary approach to working with people and organizations is problem-solving approach. So you may adopt that as your way of being in working with people to work with change. But for this course, I want you to buy into the use of it. I want to have you use, and I'll be holding you to that expectation that you will talk the talk of solution focus work. And then after this course is over, if you want to really favor problem solving approaches, that's your privilege, that's your prerogative as a consultant. I have almost completely done away with it, and I only work with people and groups in a solution focused way. But that's me, because I buy into it hook, line, and sinker, whole hog, whole nine, whatever cliche you want to use. But in this course, we are going to buy into it. We are going to support the talk of solution searching, solution selection, solution focused thinking. Second thing I want to talk about today is, I call it communicationizing. I don't think that's something that I brought up in COM 105, or if I did, I touched on it very, very briefly. But it's a key pillar of what this course is all about. And it starts with the idea that any organizational phenomenon can be described in communication-oriented terms. So you may remember from COM 105, when we talked about intercultural communication, you may remember that we touched on the concept, the term, doing being. Doing being African American, doing being Jewish, doing being a professor, doing being a student. And we talked about how even something that seems to be as irreducible as being something actually can be translated into and explained in communication-oriented terms. Well, that's communicationizing. Let's explore this briefly. Let's take a concept that's popular in organizations, that is often at the heart of a change that a client will want to make. If a client, for example, is a manager or an executive, he or she may often want to make changes that have to do with his or her enactment of this concept. And the concept is leadership. Now, leadership. We all kind of have a sense of what leadership is and what it means. We all have a sense of what a leader is or what a leader means. Apart from any convergence or divergence of these definitions and understandings, leadership can be described in communication-oriented terms. Now, it's a very complex set of detailed unpackings. That's the word, unpacking something is to communicationize it. Detailed set of communicationizings of leadership, but it can be done. So let's just take an example. A leader, however you want to describe a leader, he or she is, at least part of the time, charged with or expected to propose some actions to take and do what he or she must to enable those actions to take place. And, there are millions and millions of words written about this. You may have heard the following. The most effective leaders are those who, I think this is from the Chinese philosopher Sun Tzu. The most effective leader wants a certain result and talks to his or her constituents about what the result is, and the result gets accomplished, and the constituents who accomplish it say, we did this ourselves, and the leader's launching of the whole idea in the first place is irrelevant, if you will. It's overlooked. It's not part of the mix. It's all about, we had this great idea. Well, actually, it was the leader's great idea. But, you've probably heard that philosophical concept. Well, what that is, ultimately, that can be unpacked in communication-oriented terms. That can be described in communication-oriented terms. For example, if I'm that kind of leader, and I want ultimately a certain result, and I want the people who accomplish the result to say, we did this ourselves. This was a great idea. Maybe I would not call that person into my office and say, here's what I want you to do. Here's what we need to do. Here's what we need to accomplish. No, instead, maybe I'd use another set of communication choices, another set of language choices. I might say something like, let me run something past you. And I might describe what it is that I imagine, what it is that, you could do. And I might say, gosh, do you have any ideas about how to make this happen? Really, I'm not sure. And then you start coming up with ideas. And then I say, why don't you try that with a couple of other people? Gosh, that would be great. And, little by little, as the leader, my involvement in the generation of the solution, the results, gets diminished because everybody else is participating in the whole process. And at the end of it, God, boy, we had a great idea as a small group of 3 people handling this situation. And it all started when I said, I just want to run something past you. That was a communication choice that I made. Those words, that utterance, that set of utterances. And what I just did in telling this story was I communicationized a small piece of leadership. And the small piece of leadership I communicationized was the task that a leader always faces of enabling others to get with the program and doing something that has to be done. Let's imagine the military, for example. Now, in the military, much of that is accomplished through the process of what's called, and even civilians know this, giving orders. And there are certain criteria that constitute an appropriate order. First of all, it has to be legal. Second of all, it has to be clear and cogent. So, number 3, it's got to be doable and measurable. There's criteria that you learn in officer training about how to give an order and what an order is. There also is something, I skipped ahead here. In civilian organizations, you can't give orders, really, because it's a whole different organizational context, a whole different organizational cultural context. The equivalent of giving orders in the civilian organization might be, could be anything from making requests to making suggestions to telling people what your boss told you to get done. Could be called invitations. Those words generally don't exist in a typical mainstream military environment. Maybe they do in very, very small elite military units, like a SEAL team or something like that. But not so much. And in the civilian world, giving orders in the military sense is probably not going to work for all the obvious reasons, because it's 2 different organizational contexts, organizational cultures. So communicationizing leadership means to answer the question, what are the communication choices that taken as a whole equate to being a leader? And all of that is leadership. So leadership, we talk about it as if it's this thing, but actually it's not. It is a process, much like organizations we learned at COMMUNICATION 5. An organization is a process, and communication is at the heart of describing it. So, today we've talked about favoring a solution-focused orientation to problem solving. In other words, favoring thinking in terms of conditions that can be changed, that one wants changed, and looking at the challenge not as solving a problem or identifying a problem, as much as searching for solutions, selecting solutions that will enable the change to occur that you want to occur. And then also, number 2, we went over this idea of communicationizing various organizational phenomena. Now, in the future, I'll be going into detail on both of these, but I want to introduce those 2 absolutely crucial concepts for us to understand. We take a solution-focused orientation to consulting and coaching, and we define or look for a description of any phenomenon in communication-oriented terms. We'll see you on Wednesday. Let's hope Zoom is cooperating on the 26th at 10 o'clock.